I have worked with women in prison for close to 2 decades, most of that time in a program that I founded, the Family Preservation Project. In the Family Preservation Project, we work alongside women to become deeply rooted in their identities as mothers and to provide for their children the things that no one was able to provide for them, to break a cycle. Going into prison is like being dropped on another planet, and I have spent the majority of my time there trying to understand its function and its purpose, its value, how we got to this place, and wrestling with my own purpose and value, knowing that no matter how much I believe in the work we are doing, it takes place in a place where human beings live in cages, and always wishing it didn't. Inside of the prison walls live countless stories with which I have been entrusted, sad stories, tragic stories, cruel stories, hilarious stories of violence and chaos, emptiness and longing, bad choices, no choices, thoughtlessness, forgetfulness, human stories, really. Prisons themselves write stories of their successes and heroes, of safety and transformation, personal growth and rehabilitation. And in those rare moments where prison might, for whatever reason, creep into your consciousness, you tell stories too. And then there are the most troubling stories of all. These are the stories that the women inside have learned to tell about their own brokenness and salvation, the story where prison saved their life. Because of all of the stories that we tell, this is the one that seems to land. It provides the guards and the guarded, the citizens and the taxpayers, the victims and the judges, with a somewhat coherent narrative, or at the very least, a story we can live with. We have in fact built an entire system on the backs of this story, and in this story, prison gets to be the hero. This is not one of those stories. This is a true story, a tale of a life, not extraordinary, just a regular life interrupted by events that led to another caged story. Ashley was 24 when we met. She had long, shiny brown hair, an easy smile, and a silly side. She could have been any one of your daughters, or maybe even mine. She had been a college student and became a mother to her daughter, Sophia, at the age of 21. Sophia was the love of her life. Ashley also had a long-standing struggle with alcoholism, and as an unintended consequence of her imprisonment, was on a fast track towards the termination of her parental rights, of irrevocably losing the right to ever be a mother again. She asked if the Family Preservation Project could help. On the evening of February 15th, 2011, Ashley made a terrible, life-altering decision. After a long, familiar domestic dispute with the father of her child, during which she consumed a lot of alcohol, Ashley got into her car with her toddler-age daughter and another young child. She woke up in a trauma center, having learned that she had blacked out, driven off the road, and hit a utility pole. Her daughter, and especially the other young child, had sustained injuries, but were stable. Next, a flurry of detectives, child protective services. The last image that Sophia would have was of her mother being shackled to her hospital bed after she flew into the panic and rage that any mother watching their child being taken away would. Ashley was facing 2 serious felony convictions that would send her to prison for close to 12 years. She accepted a plea deal for 5 years with good time, but no programs, as an incentive not to take her case to trial. As a part of her punishment, Ashley would be ineligible to receive treatment. She would be disallowed the opportunity to address the very thing that brought her to prison. And there would also be no programs available to her inside that addressed domestic violence or grief or trauma or loss or eating disorders. But you and I would invest the same $207,000 simply to keep Ashley locked away, whether or not she had the opportunity to get better or make anything better. You see, the story that Ashley was broken meant we could simply throw her away. At her sentencing hearing, the judge told Ashley that her daughter, Sophia, who was less than 3 years old at the time, would grow up to be an alcoholic just like her, and that her daughter, Sophia, would end up in prison just like her. And you and I would invest $200,000 for the state to provide for Sophia's care. And while this story ignited a small spark inside of Ashley to prove this judge wrong, this story of brokenness and inevitability also wound up living deep inside of her, as stories that are told about us often do. Clearly, Ashley's is a terrible story, and on that February evening, lives were changed forever. So to paint Ashley, or all of the women I have worked with, as victims of circumstance and their crimes, victimless crimes, would be unfair and untrue. In fact, all of the women who I have worked with inside have hurt people, and especially their children. But let's be clear that what was required in all of their stories was an interruption, and what ultimately saved their lives was the interruption. That interruption happened to be prison, which is a very high-stakes game. But when people with access to resources' lives begin to spiral out of control, as they often do, and even when they hurt people along the way, they might go on a retreat or to a spa or a high-end treatment facility. No forced separation from their children for years on end, no living in cages, no state identification number, no label for life. And to those inclined to crime and punishment, I want you to consider this. Most crimes that women commit are crimes of survival or crimes rooted in addiction. And the through line is not criminal thinking or brokenness, but poverty. So no high-end treatment center. The interruption comes in the form of human caging, a solution that we created on the backs of many stories that aren't true. In the Family Preservation Project, we have spent years pounding our fists on the table trying to convince folks that these stories aren't true, and to bring the stories that are true to life. Do you know who the hardest people to convince that there are holes in these stories of brokenness and prison as heroes are? It's not the lawmakers or even the actors in our criminal legal system. The hardest people to convince that these stories aren't true are the women inside, and inside of whom these stories live. So Ashley joined the Family Preservation Project with a singular goal in mind, the same goal that we have for every mother: to rewrite the ending of a story that had both been written and not yet written. You see, not only was Ashley discarded because of her brokenness, so in essence was Sophia, as the story of her brokenness was already being penned. The work ahead was to reverse the termination of Ashley's parental rights. To do this, we would fight alongside her tooth and nail to get into that treatment program, the one the judge disallowed. To do this, she would need to demonstrate over and over again that she was not only fit, but more importantly, worthy of being a mother. And to do this, she would need to believe those things. But until she could, we would believe them for her. The Family Preservation Project, her village, would surround Ashley with love until she was able to begin to love herself, because this is the only thing that works. But prison, as the solution, had the following consequences, making it hard for Ashley to muster a fight. Her mental health deteriorated, her eating disorder became exacerbated, her confidence and self-esteem were shattered as the state went about its business of irrevocably taking away her right to ever be a mother again. She became institutionalized and still suffers from PTSD from her time inside. And Sophia would suffer a long, traumatic, and ambiguous loss of her mother on the heels of an extremely traumatic event. So what did we accomplish? We created an interruption. Ashley was removed from the community for 5 years so that she would not pose a threat, and Sophia was cared for by a safe and loving family during their separation. And that's really it. If we were to focus on Ashley's actual transgression, its root causes, the harm that she caused, and repairing that harm, and we hold that up to the intervention that we offered and its cost, both human and financial, prison as a solution was an abject failure. So if our intent is simply to punish, we're on the money. But punishment alone does not ensure public safety, and prison does not deter crime. If it did, we would see better than a 50% rate of recidivism nationwide. If our intent is to make corrections, which is the story that we tell, we are undoubtedly missing the mark. And even if we were to heavily resource prisons with programs that address the things that brought people there, they would still be prisons, human cages, and the unintended consequences would still be immense. What if we reimagine Ashley's story? What if the story went something like this? Ashley woke up in a trauma center, having learned that she had blacked out, driven off the road, and hit a utility pole. Her daughter, and especially the other young child, had sustained injuries but were stable. Folks in the hospital immediately attended to everybody's physical and emotional needs. And when the detectives and child protective services arrived, they assessed the situation as a whole and determined to send Ashley to a secure residential dual diagnosis treatment facility where she could address the underlying issues that led to her alcoholism and eating disorder, where her daughter could live and where they together could begin to heal from the trauma that they both endured. Took her driver's license away for 3 years and remanded her to community service, working with teens around the perils of drunk driving and in a trauma center where she could help others begin to heal. This might almost look like true accountability. This might look a lot like humanity. Today, Ashley is a mother. 2 years from now, she will earn her bachelor's degree. She attends to her physical health, her mental health, her sobriety, and has successfully stayed out of unhealthy relationships. And prison did not save her life, because prison has saved no one's life, at least no one that I know. But when the only tool you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When our story is that people are broken, we can simply throw them away. And if they emerge from prison still standing and believing that prison and not the interruption saved their life, then prison gets to be the hero. I want to tell you a story that I know, a story with which I have had the privilege of being entrusted, a true story. The women inside the walls are not broken people. Their lives needed to be interrupted, yes, but they are not the stories we have made of them. Prison has become a social services agency of last resort, a place that lives at the intersection of all of our failures to provide interruptions. And here's what prisons are not. They're not hospitals or schools or mental health facilities or maternity wards. These things exist inside in small numbers as prisons attempt to meet the demands and expectations we have placed on them. The system is not broken. Prisons are human cages doing exactly what they were designed to do. So let's stop trying to fix it.
How are you feeling?
Good.
You look upset. Come here.
I don't like hair.
What's up, baby girl? Just want to cuddle? Want me to sing you? No? You are my sunshine. My little sunshine. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. So please don't take Sophia away. Is that better? You make you feel better? It makes me feel better too.
Let's abandon the idea of building better prisons. Let's work to create better interruptions. Let's reimagine a world where we no longer look to repair harm by inflicting it, a world where Ashley, not prison, gets to be the hero of the story. Thank you.